Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Sports Overtime here on the Valley News Now Network. And we have a very special guest once again, allowing me to wear my Snoopy basketball tie. It's going to be Chris Hine here, the Timberwolves beat reporter for the Minnesota Star Tribune now, and also the author of the book Ant, a biography on Anthony Edwards. Chris, thanks for hopping on here. How are you doing today?
Doing all right. Just got back from practice. How are you?
Not too shabby. Not too shabby. Just glad we get to have you on here. First question here, Chris, and this may be the most important question I ask. As the resident Mariah Carey fan that we all know and love, how do you feel about when we get around to Christmas here and All I Want for Christmas Is You plays over and over again? Do you like that she kind of runs the holiday, or you're like, no, there's so many better tunes out there?
Oh, no, I love it. I'll never not want to hear that song every year. I just walked into a store the other day, and the first thing that hit me was that song playing over the speakers. So it is that time of year. I am ready for it. It just fills me with a lot of happiness whenever I hear that song. I don't care how anybody else thinks.
Hey, a lover of Mariah Carey no matter what, even if it comes in 30 times a day, we're still out here for it. Now, Chris, before we get to the Wolves talk here, I want to talk about the book here, Ant, the incredible journey of NBA rising star Anthony Edwards. Obviously, can't spoil too much about the book, but we want our Fargo people to take a look at that as well. But one thing that really stood out to me, Chris, and we all saw this kind of story come out in Edwards' pre-draft, was he loves football. That was his sport when he was younger. But talking to so many people from his childhood, Chris, when did that sort of shift to basketball, and how deep is the love for football?
Yeah, he still loves football today. We'll chat with him off to the side of the locker room sometimes, and we'll talk to him about Georgia football or what's going on in the NFL, and he still very much, watches and tracks, keeps up with football. And that was his childhood growing up. It was kind of a dual, half the year was playing football, and the other half was playing basketball. And that was essentially his childhood until he was about 13, 14 years old. And right around the time he was entering high school, he had some injuries. He got banged up a little bit. And that was the moment around 14, 15 that he made the switch permanently to just play basketball. He was a little over getting injured, and he didn't want to get hit too much. So he made the full-time switch to basketball right around then. And, but I think the football background really benefited him. He acquired, a lot of a different kind of agility, athleticism than kids that might have just focused on basketball their entire lives. And I think it provided a little toughness to him as well. We've seen him now in his sixth NBA season. He hasn't really missed, I think, more than 9 or 10 games in a season. So I think it allows him to play through stuff and, little dings and bruises here and there that maybe other guys might miss significant amounts of time or a game here and there. He plays through it.
Yeah, certainly. And you talk about the toughness of Anthony Edwards physically there, but also emotionally, too. You talk about the infectious positivity he has no matter what scenario he's in, but a very rare case in his situation, losing his mom at a very young age, then his grandmother before he was drafted. Chris, it would take me absolute years to rebound from a couple losses like that. What kept him in such a positive mindset, and how was that kind of translated to today?
It's probably the most miraculous and improbable part of his story is coming out of such deep hurt and heartbreak when you're 13 years old and you lose both your mother and your grandmother about 6 months apart or so. And I think he had a good core of people around him. His family, was very tight-knit, his 2 brothers and his sister. And he had a really good group of folks, friends and other, teammates, families, and things like that really looked out for him, made sure he was okay. And a lot of these people are still very important figures in his life to this day. He keeps a very tight-knit circle like that. And a lot of the people that you see around him now are people that were in his life then. And, whether he needed a ride, whether he needed a place to stay for a weekend or what have you, they were always there for him to provide that for him. And I think he's very grateful for the support he received along the way, and that's why, I go to Wolves games and I see a lot of the people that you meet in the book. I see a lot of them coming to town to visit, to see him at Wolves games, and he always, takes the time to visit with them and spend time with them whenever they're in town. So it's really, I think, an uplifting story about the power of community and what that can do to really help someone along the way when they need a little bit of help.
Yeah, especially when you talk to some of his teammates or mentors. When you talk to him about the loss, did they wonder, like, how does this guy keep the smile on his face after going through such loss?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's how did he come out of that experience with such a positive attitude? And I think you point to how his mother and his grandmother were as people. They were always positive people around him. They filled him with a lot of confidence that I think you see today. And I think that's where that comes from is, talking to people around him, talking to his brother a few years ago when I interviewed him, their mother and their grandmother was always filled with positive energy. And so I think that is, you see that in Ant. That would probably be the best way I could describe it is that their personalities live on through him.
That's just amazing to take that kind of loss and just run with it and become who he is today. Now, when you talk to everyone in that area as well here, Chris, is there a story you were told that didn't make the book, but you were like, man, that's just so Ant?
Honestly, I think every story or all the stories that I wanted to get in the book, I got in. There wasn't much that I left on the cutting room table. I think, a lot of the stories from the AAU years are fun. I enjoy the one story about how he was staying with his grandmother at an AAU tournament, and his coach, Dana Watkins, suspected him of having gotten in the pool in the hotel the day before because it showed when he was on the court the next day. And it was because his grandmother wasn't going to say no to him if he wanted to get into the pool, even though Dana had a rule, nobody gets in the pool until the tournament is over. And sure enough, Ant got in the pool, and Dana found out about it, and that's probably a highlight of the early Ant years for me.
A quick little learning lesson for Ant there.
Mm-hmm.
Now for this book here, Chris, where can our Fargo people find this?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere that online that books are sold. My publisher, HarperCollins, has a way to, and on my social media, you can follow links there as well if you want to support independent booksellers that have it as well. But in general, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the major places where you buy books will have it.
Love it. Hopefully we see those sales boost a little bit with our Fargo crowd here. But getting back to the court, Chris, obviously the Wolves have won 5 out of their last 6 games. You were just at media availability here. Have the vibes gotten much better compared to what we were at 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, they have been for sure. I think you're starting to see them get back to themselves. Ant being back has helped with that now that he's over his hamstring injury. Defensively, Chris Finch today used the phrase they're up off the mat when it comes to playing better defense, that now they just got to start throwing more punches. So that's a work in progress. But one thing that I think has helped is they're 7-4 through 11 games. Yes, there's a lot to work on. I think they feel confident that they can fix some of these issues, especially on the defensive end. And it's not as if their record is a 5-alarm fire right now. Like, they're 7-4. They're doing fine. Yes, it could be better. Yes, they could be playing better. But I do think there's a sense that they'll right the ship here, and they're taking care of the games that they should win for the most part in this stretch, and that's something that they not have always done in the last couple of years as well.
And it's great to get back on track here. We were the Wolves Twitter was in DEFCON mode here just a couple weeks ago when you're losing a couple close games, but in this little streak,
it usually is after they lose. No matter how close or what the loss is, Wolves Twitter is usually
it's devastation
they're racing,
every time.
They're racing to hit the panic button after every loss. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and getting back on track, obviously the opposition really hasn't been great facing the Hornets, Nets, Jazz, Kings, but a great time to really mold this team together. From your eyes, what have you been seeing these past couple weeks that has really brought this team together?
I think offensively they look, to at least to start a season, as good as I've ever seen them look offensively. I think everybody's understands their role. Jaden has expanded his role. He looks great. Julius Randle just looks so comfortable right now, especially compared to a year ago. They know how to play in and around him. He's figured out how best to fit in with everybody. Ant has picked up where he's left off, coming back from injury. I think right now, offensively, you're really encouraged by what you see, just because everybody just seems to be clicking. They have the right kind of flow. I think, having a year with Dante and Julius, now everybody understands kind of how best to operate this thing. And you see Jaden with the expanded opportunities now this year. He's taken, I think, a step up and become so much more of a weapon that opponents are going to have to respect. And if they don't respect him, he's going to make them pay. Whereas a year ago, that wasn't always the case. So offensively, right now, it looks about as, like I said, as good as it's been, especially early in the season, as I've seen the last couple of years. Defensively, again, still a work in progress. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker, maybe they miss him a little bit more than they might have thought coming into the year to kind of fill some of the perimeter defense. But I think if Ant steps up on that end, which he has the last couple of games, it allows Jaden McDaniels to roam off ball a little more. And when you have that plus Rudy being able to roam off the ball, I think that's a good combination. So they're figuring some things out that are maybe a little different on that end of the floor as opposed to years past. So I think the arrow overall is pointing up for them early in the season, despite some really ugly losses in the first week. But I'll go back to even the last 2 years, even 2 years ago when they, ended up third in the Western Conference. They had some really bad losses the first week of the season, and they turned the ship around pretty quickly. So, I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from maybe that first week.
Yeah, that cat illness 2 years ago really put a damper on the start to the season. The Julius trade happening right before training camp kind of put a damper on the beginning of the last season. And then a little bit of Terrence Shannon Jr. kind of out of the lineup here as well. But I also want to ask about that pairing of Julius and Ant. Even with the return of Ant, Julius is still getting his. They get combined for 62 points from the duo against Utah this past game. But in year two of Randle here, Chris, how do you think he's fared as Edwards' running mate, especially compared to those cat years? Two different players, but how do you decipher the two?
Yeah, I think it took a while for Julius to lean into more of that point forward mentality. And Julius just benefits so much from the attention that Ant draws, and it prevents teams from crowding Julius too much, because they know that if they do with Julius, he's going to make a play out of it. And the Wolves have, shooters around him. They've got Ant that if you leave Ant open, he'll make you pay from three, or you give him a lane to the basket. And just Julius having that distributor mentality first, I think, was such a revelation for them halfway through last season, and it's just unlocked everything in and around the offense. Because I think his ability to draw attention away from Ant benefits Ant in the long run, and vice versa. So because Julius can have the ball in his hands a little bit more, or much more than Cat did, I think it just helps the offense overall, because defenses kind of have to pick a poison right now on offense, and the Wolves are making all the right moves. When defenses do make that choice, they're reacting well off of that, and they're hitting shots at a pretty good clip. But I also think it's no coincidence that they're shooting well, because they're creating great looks.
Yeah, and I think we heard, if I remember correctly, we heard a little bit about it last year, how Julius had this mindset of scoring first, being the guy in New York. And now, there was a big adjustment period with that. Julius hasn't had a running mate like Ant, and it's now that he's kind of tweaked his game a little bit, I think he's starting to realize that the way he uses Ant opens up much better shots for Julius.
It does, because, again, the defenses have to choose. If Julius is backing down a smaller defender in the post, do you double off of that? Well, Julius is going to swing it around, and somebody's going to get an open shot, and that might be Ant, who can shoot 40% from three-point range. Do you put a bigger guy on Julius? Well, he's got the ability to drive around that player and get to the rim. So we saw that, I think, perfected in the playoff series against the Lakers and the Warriors, they didn't quite know what to do. And when Ant, to his credit, in those moments, resisted the temptation to try and take over the moment and just kind of let Julius do his thing. If he had a mismatch or a good opportunity and it was one-on-one and they weren't doubling Julius, like Ant had the patience to make the right play and just bide his time until maybe later in the game things would open up for him. So right now they've got a good balance, a good give and take of feel for the moment, feel for the game, what the game may need at a certain time. And you've seen Julius already has 2 triple doubles on the season, and I think that's exactly what they envisioned for him.
Goosebumps from Julius this year, that's for sure. The pairing has been just fantastic in a way that the ISO ball between those two when they see one-on-one matchups, it doesn't really feel as sticky as it did with the kind of Cat pairing, does it?
It doesn't, and I think I think having multiple playmakers like that, Cat as good as he is is not a huge playmaker for others the way Julius is, right? Cat's not getting triple doubles, and Julius has the ability to do that. So sometimes, here's the thing: it's an interesting give and take because Ant and Julius can operate, heavy in isolation, but I think with Julius, eventually that isolation can create ball movement, which may sound counterintuitive, right? It's like, oh, he's just going to go ISO, ISO, ISO. But at a certain point, if Julius reads it properly, which he more than usually does, then he throws a 90-mile-an-hour fastball out of the post to somebody who's open on the three-point line, and all of a sudden the defense is racing to rotate, and now you're doing pass, swing, and now the ball's moving. It just might take a couple seconds for that to develop. So it is an interesting dichotomy of, you think of Ant and Julius as being these good ISO players, but the movement can come from sometimes how well they operate in isolation.
And he's been an absolute killer in the mid-range, Julius has. The mid-range is a layup if you grind, Chris. That's been my motto. Let's bring the mid-range jumper back. Way more high percentage than people think. But another guy that's really great in that mid-range or close to the basket, the emergence of Jaden McDaniels. You touched on him a little bit. Career-high scoring, shooting percentages, and I believe rebounding. But I just think that it's awesome. He's still finding ways to score, even still being that third, fourth type option. I mean, we've seen him be the third, fourth option for a few years now. What's contributed to the rise? Did you hear anything from the camp about more of a scoring load from Finch or anyone?
I think Jaden has always been, as Finch would say, a barometer for how the ball movement and the offense is flowing. Like when the offense is humming, when the ball movement is crisp, Jaden tends to find open looks within the offense. When the ball slows down and it does become more ISO heavy without that ball movement feature, then Jaden struggles to score. I think there's a little bit of that, just how well the offense is humming overall. Number two, the emphasis on transition helps him a little bit because that makes the offense, A, a little more random as to who's going to be scoring, and B, Jaden is a very good weapon in transition because he has this ability to kind of get to his spot, that little 6 to 7 foot sort of jumper in the lane where, if it's a smaller defender, they don't really have a chance to guard it because he's so tall, and he has the ability to get it up over a taller defender, and he's money whenever he gets to that portion of the floor, it seems like. So his ability to do that in transition, attack the basket, get to that little 6-footer has been huge for him. He's shooting the three really well so far this season at probably an unsustainable clip, but you're encouraged by that as well. So right now, I think just the way the offense is flowing, the added emphasis on transition has been huge for him, and I think a little bit too, just defense affects offense sometimes, and the energy you expend on one end of the floor, it's not you can't always go 100% full throttle all the time. So having him play off ball a little more on the defensive end of the floor, number one, helps keep him out of foul trouble, And number two, maybe allows him to have a little more energy for the offensive end of the floor where he can take the ball off the dribble and attack more and is more motivated to do so as opposed to maybe settling for a jump shot.
He's been nothing but a pleasure to watch this season. He's almost entered unconditional love territory for me where he can do absolutely no wrong. But kind of sticking with this starting five as well, Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this. The curious case of Rudy Gobert. There's no doubt he changes everything defensively and eats bad teams for lunch. Obviously, top 5 defense in the league when he's on the court, the worst without him. But against good teams, still great on defense, even though it may drop a tick, but also kind of hard to watch on offense at times. Are you seeing the same thing, Chris? And how is he absolutely dominating, say, against the Kings, but can struggle against a Mitchell Robinson or DeAndre Ayton at times?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it just boils down to personnel on the other team, right? It's, do they have a matchup for Rudy? Do they have a center of that quality, of that caliber? And sometimes it's as easy as that, right? The one thing that Rudy has shown with his ability at this point in his career, he is a reliable guy to have on the floor against some of these weaker teams, right? The Brooklyns, the Charlottes, Sacramento, Utah. Like, I think he's had his best games against these teams, and that's helped them take care of business against these teams. Down the stretch last year against those kind of teams, when the Wolves were fighting to claw their way out of the play-in tournament and get to the 6th seed, they faced a lot of lower standing teams. And he would have like 20 and 18, or he came very close to 20-20 multiple times late last season. And that's carried over into this season, where he's helped them get through some of these teams and just pile wins. Now, I don't know what that's going to mean come April in the postseason, or if a team has, let's take Oklahoma City, for instance, right, with Holmgren and Hartenstein. Is that going to help against them? I don't know. I think it's encouraging the way that they've involved him in the offense early in the season. The last couple of games have been very encouraging on that front. But again, does that continue against some of these better teams? I'm a little skeptical, and I'll believe it when I see it. But when it comes to, I think the value that he has for this team, that people online and whatever the Rudy is overrated crowd don't understand, is he does help them win games on a night in, night out basis, and there is a value to that.
Having the best offense in the league when he's off the court is certainly fun to watch, but when you see the defensive minutes without Rudy Gobert, it's quite jarring to say the least. Now, if Rudy kind of struggles keeping up with some younger guys or some, like a DeAndre Ayton or Mitchell Robinson, is there a point in the season that Chris Finch may just smash the Beringer button and get him into the rotation?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's tough. I think that's tough to ask. I think there's a lot that they're very encouraged by with Johan Beringer. I just don't know how viable that would be. And I still think there's a lot he's learning about just the ins and outs of playing defense. And one of the things that Rudy adds on the defensive end of the floor is he is the quarterback of the defense, right? So he's making the calls, he's directing guys where to go, and so that's part of it, right? So how does that work if Johan is in there, quote unquote, playing the Rudy role, right? I think it changes things a little bit, and I just don't think right now. I mean, later in the season, who knows? But right now, I just don't think they're there yet. I think they want to try to make this work when Rudy's not on the floor, like with Nas and Julius, and just trying to figure out how best to play defense there without going to Johan just yet, because come playoff time, I don't know that Johan Beringer is going to be on the floor, but they will have these minutes with Randall and Reed as your front court. So you got to make that work.
Yeah, very interesting. And it is also a great and encouraging sign to see as well that Rudy Gobert is getting more involved in the offense, right? He's catching far more lobs this year than we saw last year. But what is this kind of team, where we're at right now, how do they get back to the level of last season, right? We're sitting at 7-4 right now, still a lot to be determined, and I know it's early, but is there a potential here with this team to make a deeper run with this current roster?
Talk to me in 2 months.
Yeah.
It's too early for me to tell. 10 games or 11 games is it's too early for me to draw any grand conclusions about really anybody in the Western Conference right now. I think when you talk to people around the league, whether it's front office people, scouts, everybody, you got to take 20 to 40 games to let everybody settle in to kind of who they are and figure some things out. Sometimes guys get off to hot starts and cool down as the season goes on. Sometimes the opposite happens. So, what are you going to be doesn't really get determined until 20 to 40 games in it. And with the Wolves, it's taken usually towards the 40 game end of that spectrum as opposed to the 20 game. So I think we're still a ways away from figuring out who this team is exactly.
I will say some of the signs are there. I can feel the ball movement a little less sticky than last year. And like we mentioned before, Rudy getting more involved in the offense, that always translates to his defense. Every time I see Rudy have a great offensive game, he has a monster defensive game to back that up as well. When it's all said and done here, Chris, what do the Wolves need to do to get back to that level of that Western Conference? Not lose in 5, but get to game 6, 7, or the finals.
Yeah, that's the multi-million. I don't know. I mean, I think with the Thunder, if we're just taking the Thunder as like the bar right now, which obviously they are, and they've got a lot of pretty much everybody back from a team that just won the championship. If you look in that series, they basically dared the Wolves to involve Rudy in the offense, and the Wolves didn't do it. The Wolves' defense was not consistent, and it hasn't been consistent so far this season. So I think recapturing that defensive identity is number one. That's got it. I mean, the one game the Wolves won in that series, if you recall, I think it was game 3, they came out with a fire and an intensity on the defensive end of the floor that they didn't have the rest of the series, quite frankly. And you wonder to yourself, like, well, why can't you do that more often? And, there was no good answer to that question. So I think that's number one. If they're going to beat the Thunder, they've got to become a much better defensive team than they've shown through the first 11 games of the season right now. And I think, to be honest with you, I think some of that falls on Ant. And it falls on him really committing himself to the defensive end of the floor, living up to the promise that he can have as a very good to elite perimeter defender, and not taking possessions off or using defense to rest on offense because he, has the ball in his hands a lot on the offensive end of the floor, so he's got to conserve energy. Those days have to be over, because with the loss of Nikhil and from 2 years ago, Kyle Anderson, they don't have as defensive-minded of a roster as they used to have, but they still have very good defensive personnel. And that's because Anthony Edwards can be an elite defender. So he's been very good at that of late, and I think that's why they've won some of these games very handily over the last week. But it's an 82-game season. It's a long season, and then you got the playoffs in April. So carrying that through the whole season is going to be the challenge for him.
Definitely, and your best player can take you as far as you can get. And for Anthony Edwards, we can expect the sky is the limit, but there's some things that we need to expect to happen or see happen first before we can really believe that a finals run's in front of us.
That's right. But I think it's starting to sink in for him. I think you see that with some of the matchups he's taken, especially since he's come back from injury.
Awesome. Well, Chris Hine joining us here from the Minnesota Star Tribune and author of Ant, as well, the biography on Anthony Edwards. Chris, thank you very much for joining me here today. You got any last words, any tidbits from the media session here that you had today?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the defense is still a work in progress, but, I think with there's a different mindset, I think, when it comes to some of these lower rung teams on the standings, that they have a more business-like approach this year. So I think that's also a secret kind of thing that this team has improved early in the season that they haven't had in the last couple of years. So, while the defense is a work in progress, I think they recognize that when a team is in front of them that they should beat, they got to buckle down and win that game, which it's, again, something they should have had the last few years, but they haven't always had it.
That's the Wolves' experience. Chris,
Yes, it is.
Chris, thank you very much for joining me here today. Can't thank you enough for hopping on, expanding the range to Fargo. We're in the viewing area, so might as well keep that Wolves fandom alive. But Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely, anytime. Appreciate you having me on.